Hello, everybody. We're about to start in a couple of minutes, but since it's more difficult than expected to actually come here, find a room, settle down, we'll just, give you a little bit more time to relax, and we'll wait, I think, for a couple of more minutes for our government representatives to join the conversation. So, hello everybody, or Bulavi Naka everybody. My name is Lina Dabak from Climate Action Network, and I would like to welcome you all on behalf of CAN, Congo, which is the Chinese network, Climate Action Network, and La Ruta del Clima, to our event Yardsticks for Success at COP23. This event happened at the beginning of another COP, but also after a series of numerous hurricanes, droughts, and other disasters. Climate change impacts are unfolding before our eyes, and 2017 looks really to be one of the hottest years on record, the 4th year in a series of the hottest years on record. Increasing extreme weather events are bringing untold damage and loss and damage of life and livelihoods, with subsequent costs spiraling into billions of dollars. So for us, the organizers of this event, this is really not just another COP. This is a COP that must deliver, and we have experts on this panel about key markers of progress at COP23 to ensure that the Paris Agreement delivers on its full potential, including by identifying concrete steps towards comprehensive implementation guidelines, steps to raise ambition to staying below 1.5 degrees, a robust framework for dealing with climate impacts through enhanced adaptation, loss and damage mechanisms, and means of implementation. From CAN's perspective, there are 3 key elements that need to be ensured when defining the Paris Work Program, and how we would also look at success at this COP. First, securing that the framework helps to raise ambition to avoid increasing impact. Secondly, that it guarantees support for action to enable increased ambition. And thirdly, ensuring transparency of action. As a 4th element, we also need to have implementation starting already, and we have 2 speakers particularly who will talk about implementation from a more national perspective, and yeah, you will hear about that later on. And before I introduce the speakers on this panel, I would also like to welcome Ambassador Soran. He is from the Fiji presidency, and we're extremely happy to have you and hear also your views on what civil society is bringing to the table. And also, obviously, thank you for organizing this COP. We really look forward to our first Pacific COP. I would now like to introduce the panel, or rather also have them introduce themselves a little bit. We have our first speaker is Eliza Northrup. She is working group coordinator for CAN for the STOCKTAKE and TALANOA dialogue working group. We have to my left Jenny Jiva. She is a coordinator for Pacific Climate Action Network. Then we have Lucille Dafou. She is working for RAC France. And then we have Yong Song Chen. He is working for the Green Education Center in China. And last but not least, we have Adrian Martinez from the Asociación La Ruta del Clima. So I would want to start with giving Eliza the floor to talk about the ambition package that we would like to see overall, and what actually COP23 can deliver on the way to enhance ambition. Thanks, Eliza.
Thanks, Lena. Do you want to bring up my slides? So as Lena has suggested, I'm going to focus on sort of one element of the sort of yardsticks for success that we see on behalf of CAN out of COP23, which is really making progress on sort of the ambition pillar, or the ambition mechanism of the Paris Agreement, which has a number of components. I'm going to focus on particularly the role that COP23 will play in launching what is now known as the TALANOA dialogue for next year, which will be a crucial first step in really creating the virtuous cycle of ambition that the Paris Agreement envisages, as well as touch briefly on the progress or sort of the expectations that we as civil society have for progress on the global stocktake within the broader implementation guidelines that will be negotiated during this session. So again, to sort of put all of this in context, and as Lena suggested, the Paris Agreement sets ambitious goals to keep temperature increase to well below 2 degrees, but also pursue efforts to keep below 1.5. We know how important 1.5 is. We also know that the level of mitigation ambition in current NDCs, the current round that was submitted ahead of Paris, is not sufficient to get us to those goals. But the Paris Agreement creates a number of mechanisms and processes that require on all parties collectively enhancing their action and their support over time, informed by regular moments to take stock of progress, where current efforts are, where they need to be, as well as identify opportunities for enhanced individual action, enhanced collective action, as the mechanism for how we achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And that's the sort of diagram that I've got, go back, at the moment, is this sort of concept of the arc of ambition. Now, this is not, specified as such in the Paris Agreement, but is really, I think, the way that we all visualise how the Paris Agreement, the potential of the Paris Agreement to work and to really close that gap. And sort of the two elements that I'm going to be talking about today is the role of the what was the original facilitative dialogue, now the TALANOA dialogue, as well as the global stocktake. Okay, so just to sort of, for those of you that may not be following this as closely, to make sure we all understand where this came from, this was a core element of the Paris outcome. It is not in the Paris Agreement itself, but it is in the decision text. And essentially requests parties to come back to convene a facilitative dialogue in 2018 to take stock of collective efforts of parties in relation to progress towards the long-term goal referred to in Article 4.1 of the agreement, and to inform the preparation of NDCs. So that's where we started, and a lot of progress has already been made since Paris. Essentially the Moroccan and Fiji presidency, so last year's COP presidency, and Fiji this year were mandated last year to undertake inclusive and transparent consultations with parties during the Bonn session that we had in May and here at COP23, and to jointly report back to parties at COP23 here in Bonn. And these consultations were essentially on the design of this facilitative dialogue, how it was going to be conducted next year, who was going to be involved, what the outcomes, the process was going to be. Extensive consultations have occurred with both parties and non-party stakeholders over the last year, and informal suggestions on the features of this dialogue have been proposed by the presidency. So I mentioned earlier, that it used to be called the facilitative dialogue, sort of now rebranded, renamed as the TALANOA dialogue, which I think is incredibly important and something that can strongly supports to really bring in the concept not only of sort of ownership and the role of Fiji in really carrying forward this dialogue next year during the year of its presidency, but also to really bring in, I think, the expectations that we all have for the dialogue, in the sense that it is going to be inclusive and transparent and participatory, and really be focused on shared learning, shared exchange of experience, and really a forward-looking process to assess, essentially answer these three questions, which is, where are we? So this concept of coming back to the original decision text of collective progress, but where do we need to be according to the long-term goals? And I think third and most importantly for us is how do we get there? This is the opportunity that the dialogue presents us with next year, is really to kickstart the entire ambition mechanism under the Paris Agreement that I had a slide on earlier. Next year is the first sort of crucial year to really step up. Next one. So this is quite a bit on this page, but I just want to indicate, I think, or the most recent proposal that has come by both presidencies last week. This is currently only a proposal, so we know that there is going to be further consultations over the next couple of weeks, but the final proposal, I think, will be shared by the end of COP23. But I just wanted to highlight sort of a couple of the features that I think we as civil society see as really important, and that we're very encouraged to see in the proposals that have been submitted so far, which is the concept of sort of the launch of the dialogue from COP23, that this is really starting now and carrying right through next year, that it is a process and not a moment, and that it incorporates the key messages and activities and events that will be happening outside the formal UNFCCC process, which I think is incredibly important. You'll see the sort of the technical discussions, if you like, that are structured around those three main questions on the previous slide. Where are we? Where do we want to go? Where do we need to be? And how do we get there? Really feeding into sort of summary reports that will ultimately lead into a high-level political discussion and event at COP24 at the end of next year, which we hope will send a strong signal of both the need for enhanced action as well as the opportunities for enhanced action. The other thing that I did want to mention is obviously the IPCC report on 1.5 will be a crucial element of the discussions next year. So for us, I suppose, as civil society, success in relation to the TALANOA dialogue, as I've indicated, I think we've been very encouraged and are very supportive of the process that the presidencies have taken so far. We're very encouraged and supportive again of the process that is emerging for next year. So I think for us, what we want to see out of COP23 is really securing the TALANOA dialogue next year as the first step in this much broader arc of ambition under the Paris Agreement. We want to continue and see support for the suggestion or the recommendation in the informal note, which suggests that both the Fiji and the incoming COP24 presidency, Poland, would have a role throughout next year. That Fiji would have a role not only sort of during the year in the technical discussions, but obviously as part of the sort of final high-level meeting. We think that is incredibly important. We want to avoid a sort of negotiated lowest common denominator of the process itself. We're very supportive of what has happened so far. We do want clarity on the active participation of non-party stakeholders, both in the submission of inputs to the dialogue, as well as participation in some form in the actual technical discussions. And I think we want to see a consensus emerging around the purpose of the TALANOA dialogue, as I've indicated, that the purpose of this dialogue is to assess where we are and really highlight the need for enhanced action, particularly in connection with the 1.5 degree goal, but really be very forward-looking, collaborative, strong focus on partnerships and cooperation to highlight the opportunity for enhanced action and to really bring what is already happening out in the real world and the opportunities in terms of sustainable development and the economy and well-being into the negotiation space and have it resonate, so that that third discussion question that I mentioned, how we get there, can really identify tangible, impactful, meaningful actions that all countries can take forward, obviously in a nationally determined manner, but can take forward to really enhance their own action and hopefully really kickstart this arc of ambition. So that is the TALANOA dialogue, something I think you can tell we're reasonably excited about. The other element within this sort of broad ambition package that we think COP23 can deliver is part of the implementation guidelines or the rulebook of the Paris Agreement that they are negotiating over there in Bulla, and it's progress on the modalities of the global stocktake. So again, coming sort of back to the very first slide, the global stocktake is the collective moment to take stock of implementation of the Paris Agreement. It is contained, unlike the dialogue, in the agreement itself in Article 14. It has a broader scope than the dialogue. That's the sort of first paragraph of the text there. It will happen every 5 years, starting in 2023, as I said, to take stock of the implementation of the agreement for the purpose of assessing collective progress towards achieving the purpose of the agreement and its long-term goals. And it will do so in a comprehensive and facilitative manner, considering mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation and support, and in the light of equity and best available science. It is sort of unlike anything that we have attempted under the UNFCCC before. We've had a lot of review processes, but this is unique in its sort of breadth and its nature. So there is quite a bit for the negotiators to work through, but we think quite a bit of progress can actually be made here at COP23. I suppose I can touch on, no, I won't. Next slide. So largely what we expect from the global stocktake is a clear political signal to enhance action and support as required under Article 4.3, which I think was probably on the previous slide. It is a collective assessment, but we think that ultimately that collective assessment needs to help individual parties to be able to identify next steps. We want it to be comprehensive, balanced, and a holistic assessment of progress. It should be able to identify implementation gaps that countries can take forward. And again, in a similar vein, I think, to the TALANOA dialogue, it really needs to be a space to exchange views about opportunities, identify future collaboration and cooperative action, not only between parties, but also between parties and non-party stakeholders and actors outside the UNFCCC. It's critical that equity and science are cross-cutting and underpin the entire process, but it also needs to be a process that can strengthen over time. The first one will be in 2023, the next one in 2028, and ongoing. There needs to be a mechanism where we can continue to build on and strengthen, learn from the previous process, enable new information, changing needs to sort of build in and continue this very robust but durable process. So in particular, what I think we're sort of calling on negotiators to look at in the next couple of weeks is really getting some clarity and unpacking the scope, reaching consensus around the long-term goals and the purpose. What does it mean to take stock of implementation? How do we do that in a comprehensive way? In the sense that form follows function, making sure that the design of the global stocktake and work streams really, again, respond to the purpose and function of the global stocktake and can deliver the outcomes that the Paris Agreement requires of the global stocktake. Recognition of the importance of non-party stakeholders to the global stocktake process, both in the provision of inputs and information, science, data, as well as to the process and discussions themselves. Lastly, and sort of thinking about some of the core research questions and making sure that the sources of input identified respond to those again, so that we design a global stocktake that is robust and fit for purpose for the ambition mechanism. That's it. Last one. Sorry. Just to come back to this general point about the global stocktake being part of a much broader package around implementation guidelines. CAN is obviously still very supportive and forward-looking about the fact that these must be adopted next year, COP24. This is important for a number of reasons. Also part of that in terms of enabling those countries that want to update their NDCs by 2020 to do so, being clear on the rules of the game. So COP23 really needs to make tangible progress on identifying those core elements and have sort of text emerging with key decision points and options to resolve next year. Done.
Thanks, Eliza. So now that we have like a good overview of how the process for greater ambition can look like, there's another important element that really needs to be part of this overarching ambition package. So I would like to give the floor to Lucille Lafou and to
Thanks,
give
Tina. So yeah, one of the main issues that we need to deal with at COP23 this year is the question of climate finance. Can I get my slides on the screen, please? So basically, as Lina said in the introduction, we are at a moment where climate impacts are growing everywhere in the world, and the needs of the most vulnerable countries and populations are growing as well. So this is why we need increased support from developed countries and more broadly rich countries to those ones who are suffering the most of the impacts of climate change. So I wanted to start with a quite simple question, actually, which is why does climate finance matter? And climate finance is actually crucial in the UNFCCC process and in having ambitious outcomes in the negotiations here at COP23. So the first reason why is because this is what I said in the introduction. Climate finance is actually key to enhance solidarity between the richer countries and the most vulnerable countries. And this is key to create confidence and build trust between the UNFCCC regime and under the Paris Agreement that was adopted 2 years ago. Climate finance is also key for ambition, actually, because climate finance has the potential to unlock ambition in the run-up to 2018, especially through conditional NDCs and beyond. However, what we can say right now about climate finance is that there are actually a lot of challenges still to be solved, and this is why we need to have strong progress here at COP23. And one of the first elements that we need to advance on is the question of the 100 billion promise. And you know that this promise was made back in Copenhagen in 2009, and it was reaffirmed in Paris in 2015. However, this promise from developed countries is still far from being achieved. And under this promise, there is the issue of adaptation and adaptation finance. And this finance still lacks a lot of funding. Actually, projections to 2020 show us that adaptation finance should reach about 20% of total climate finance by 2020, which is definitely not enough to meet the needs of the most vulnerable populations. Another issue that needs to be dealt with is the question of transparency. Obviously, because the transparency of climate finance is a key element to create trust and maintain it under the climate regime. And as finance is a really scarce resource, you actually better count it well. And this is why developed countries are currently establishing new rules to count that funding that is flowing to developing countries. The last challenge, and this is a huge one actually, is that when you talk about climate finance, there are still areas that need a lot of improvements, and it particularly concerns the question of finance for loss and damage that will need to be addressed here at COP23, but also huge parts of finance such as how to make, for instance, private finance meet the needs of the most vulnerable populations. And these are areas where we need to have more work and improvements in the next few years. So now the question is what to expect for climate finance at COP23. And there are a few elements that we will be that we pay attention to during this session. The first one is that under the Fijian presidency, and because the question of solidarity is extremely important, we need to have that political signal that actually developed countries reaffirm that they commit to meet the 100 billion target by 2020, and also that they are ready to enhance adaptation finance, especially from public sources. And this is a very, very important political signal to have here at COP23 to prepare the ground for the next few years and to prepare the ground for the arc of ambition. There are also more, let's say, technical issues, but that are extremely important as well. And one of them is the issue of the adaptation fund. As you know, the adaptation fund is extremely an extremely important fund because it gives finance for small-scale adaptation projects, and most of the time in direct access. So this is a huge opportunity for the most vulnerable populations to access climate finance. And at COP22, there was a decision that this fund should serve the Paris Agreement. So this is crucial at COP23 to advance on this issue, and that the countries agree by the end of this COP that actually the adaptation fund shall serve the Paris Agreement. And this is a political decision that needs to be made to enable this recognition that adaptation is actually extremely important under the climate regime. And they will also need to think about concrete options for this adaptation fund to serve the Paris Agreement, and it includes institutional arrangements, governance, and also how do you make this fund actually sustainable in the future, especially in terms of the funding that it gets. A third issue that we need to come to terms with at COP23 is the question of loss and damage finance. And I know this is a priority for the Fijian presidency. And loss and damage finance should really get more attention and support because the needs are growing. And in this context, we have the Warsaw International Mechanism that could be mandated that should be mandated to work more specifically on this issue of finance for loss and damage. And concrete progress needs to be made in the next 2 years to make the issue more concrete, and especially to think about new tools and innovative sources for that kind of loss and damage finance. One of the issues as well, and I started to talk about it at the beginning, is the question of transparency, because you need to count climate finance well, and this goes through modalities for accounting. This is currently negotiated around under SubStar, and it will then feed into the APA agenda and feed into the Paris rulebook. On this matter, it's really important to have extremely accurate modalities for accounting, and also to make sure that actually the money that is provided and mobilized by developed countries is reported project by project with actually climate relevance that is mentioned in the reporting, and also that we have information about the grants that are being provided, because grants and grant equivalents are the most useful tools for developing countries to implement climate projects. And the last issue is actually an issue around planning, because when you talk about climate finance, you need to plan ahead. So there is one short-term planning that needs to happen here at COP23, and it is how do countries have concrete options to talk about climate finance next year around the TALANOA dialogue, and in 2018 to feed into the ambition and the arc of ambition. And this is really important that countries here identify concrete options to do that next year. And the second planning that countries need to make here is a more long-term planning. And this is the question of what's going to happen to climate finance after 2025, where the countries need to set a new finance goal. And this will be a long process, so it actually requires to plan ahead. And for this, we would advise developed countries and more broadly countries, to start define a process by 2019 to have a really comprehensive goal for climate finance after 2025 and still meet the needs of the most vulnerable populations. And obviously, when we're talking about that goal, we will be talking about an overall quantitative goal and also some kind of sub-goals to meet specific needs such as adaptation needs. So as you can see, climate finance is going to be quite a big issue, and more broadly the issue of solidarity is going to be a top priority at COP23, and we are expecting it to progress well.
Thank you very much, Lucille. So now, after we had like these really important pillars for the increased ambition in the future, we now want to look really at the present with having Jenny's views on what is needed and why this is really important, like from a specific perspective. And I have to encourage speakers actually to be a little bit shorter, because we also want to hear your views in the audience and have time for questions. So, and I also would like to use the opportunity to welcome Ambassador Aziz Mekwa and Brigitte Collet, Ambassador Brigitte Collet, which we hope also obviously to hear your thoughts on the issues. So if you can stick to maybe 5 to 8 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Lena. I will certainly do my best. Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, Bula Vinaka, and good afternoon to you all. My name is Genevieve Jiva, and I am from the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network. As a Fijian and a Pacific Islander, I have seen the impacts of climate change firsthand. I have lived through a Category 5 cyclone. I have seen changes in weather, and I know it will only get worse. This year, Fiji holds the presidency of COP23, the Pacific COP, a COP that will show how important it is that we fight for stronger action for the frontline communities and future generations. The Pacific is responsible for negligible amounts of emissions, and even if we were to achieve 100% renewable in our region, it is not even close to begin tackling the climate crisis. That is the fact. At the Pacific COP, there must be a recognition of increased urgency and ambition. We must agree to keep fossil fuels in the ground and move towards a safe and just transition to renewable energy. Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as agreed in the Paris Agreement, is a matter of survival for many vulnerable nations around the world. This means immediately phasing out coal and other fossil fuels. Developed countries and major polluters need to understand that their fossil fuels is the Pacific's loss and damage. We must see the start of a TALANOA dialogue that ensures substantial increases in mitigation ambition as soon as possible. We must ensure support is provided to frontline communities already experiencing loss and damage from a problem they didn't cause. Access to international climate finance is a matter of global justice. And beyond the negotiations, we must ensure continued progress on the global climate action agenda, especially with the Grand Coalition, which aims to accelerate action before 2020 and beyond between civil society, the scientific community, the private sector, and all levels of government, including cities and regions. We are all vulnerable, and we all need to act to ensure a safe, just, and sustainable future for all humankind, including Pacific people of this generation and those to follow. Vinaka.
Thanks very much, Jenny, for the plea and for bringing really the message of urgency to this round of presentations. and for also sticking to time, even being better than at what I had expected. So we now turn to Mr. Yongsong Chen from Green Education Center China, and I'm sure Mr. Yongsong Chen can actually be as efficient as our colleague Jenny. I'll put up your presentation.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks. Today my topic, to enhance the transparency, we need a transparency of Paris Agreement. The world needs green education. I assume that everybody will agree with me that world environmental issues are related to each other. The next slide. So that's why leaders from all world come here today to talk about issues and trying to find solutions. So far beyond that, in the rural area of China, the kids also want to see what happened and why. So green education can help. Scientists already had data on the smog. Green education can help the scientists make the data simple for the public. And kids are also curious about the dead pigs flowing on the lower reach of the Yangtze River next to Shanghai, whether they could spread disease or not. Green education can help. People sitting in a living train without knowing what to do. Green education can help. Some people want to do some recycling, but they don't know how to do it. Green education can help. People from South-South cooperation countries, they wanted to know what is renewable energy promotion in the rural area of China. Green education can help. Trash is around us everywhere now. So whether we can really eradicate the bad behavior of littering and keep clean earth, green education can help. By the 2016, there was 620,000 people joined the Leave No Trash Behind campaign. They signed the pledge cards promising that they won't leave trash anymore. Kids in the US, in the city of Pensacola, they also wanted to support the Leave No Trash Behind campaign. Green education can help. Some young people want green certificate. So green education can help them. We opened a green education museum so that you see the covered wide range of climate change issues. If you will visit the museum, green education can help. So hope is there. Next slide. Hope is there, but needs a right decision. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today is appeal to you to support green education. Green education provides public with systematic knowledge and skills and help people to take action or make a correct decision. So leaders from each country come here, many finish his signatures, but they are not green educators. Professional people and experts also come to here to help the leader to finish all the process. They are not green educators. Project officers who can implement project are not green educators. Therefore, our proposals. UN's policy and international conventions should not only be translated into native language, but should also be elaborated into teaching materials according to each country's situation. But the core idea should not be neglected. We appeal to every country to open room for green teaching materials on climate change issues to train the green education educators. We appeal to every country to open rooms for green education through its territory. The target group of green education, everyone in each country, especially the younger generation. So each country should give priority to budget setting for green education. And each country should set up a long-term strategic goal for green education. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yong-Song Chen, for bringing the importance, like also of the Article 12 here to our attention, and really, like, I think your message was very, very clear. I now give the word to our last expert, Adrian Martinez, and Adrian, please take the floor.
Just waiting for the slide to be on. And all right, thank you a lot for coming and having me and taking the time to listen a little bit of why civil society participation is important in international negotiations and also at the national level in the implementation of climate actions. So when we talk about public participation, it's very important to see where do we start from. And one of the issues or the main concept of public participation comes from the convention. And it's basically we're meant to participate on addressing climate change as civil society, and we're meant to help develop responses to this challenge. This is something that is very important to keep in mind when we start thinking about how to make this more ambitious. And we also have to keep in mind that it does not come by itself. As my colleague said, it has to have education programs and access to information and training to be an informed participation. And this is very important to keep in mind, and so it's something that is developed also in the Paris Agreement. And why does this keep having a place in climate governance? It's there because it enhances actions and it makes climate actions more effective. So it's not just because it feels a requirement for human rights or considerations of the public, but because in itself it's important, and it's important for the goal that we're looking to get, which is reducing our emissions and having a better society and environment. So this is also developed later on in the COP decisions, and each time as the negotiations move forward, we can see how it gets more complex and more detail on what public participation should actually be, at least in the international level. And we can see that the topics that should accompany public participation are more dense. For example, we get now a more specific description of what type of education we should have, a gender and sensitive and participatory education that should be aligned with public participation. Moreover, and we get a more focus on where should participation be taking place, which is in mitigation and adaptation actions. And it links also back to the convention, and it draws towards existing processes such as the NDCs and the long-term strategies that are being developed by countries at the national level and that are then brought to the international arena. So there is a connection between what has been done and what we're moving forward. And this should also lead us to where would we like to have more participation on. And for example, when we talk about the guidelines for the global STOCKTAKE, that's somewhere where we should participate, and the development of the facilitated dialogues. So there's more spaces where we can implement what we have been developing until now. However, when we think about national level implementation of climate actions or environmental issues themselves, there's lots of things that we should think in ways in regards to how can we be more ambitious. And Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration gives us a hint of where where should we move forward in this, especially because at the national level is where all these negotiations take place and where the actions are actually implemented. And one of the issues that is not reflected in climate governance, at least, is expressly that public participation should take place also in decision-making processes, in the choosing of the actions themselves, and that's very relevant, especially in the national level, where there's far many more processes than in the international level. For example, the development of national programs in regards to climate change, how the budget of countries are allocated to deal with this, which ones are prioritized or not. Public should participate in this, but how should they? And do they have a right to do it, or is it just a principle that governments should or may or may not allow them to participate? And also, we should be focusing on a a more ambitious view on public participation, questioning on what is public participation? Is it, as Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration said, about decision-making processes, or is it just a consultative participation? Is it a legitimizing participation of decisions already made by the state? Or are we talking about a multi-level governance of climate actions where different stakeholders participate and actually fit the scale of the issues that we're dealing with climate change? So when we talk about being ambitious, it does not only address of being ambitious on participating on the spaces we have in the climate governance, but being ambitious of what is public participation itself. And we have to acknowledge that an inclusive and transparent and participatory dialogue fosters that, builds empathy and brings together different stakeholders and makes better results, at least makes climate action more effective. And this is something that we should consider not only at the international arena where we are now, but also when we go and implement them, because we will have more transparent results, more inclusive results, and better policy making. So that's basically what I wanted to share a little bit about why it's important to have civil society participate at international and national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us actually to the end of the distinguished panel. And I would like to invite Mr. Ambassador Saran to share some of his thoughts after having listened to the mix of elements that need to happen to bring greater ambition and also to build like a very robust regime. And I would like to see if I can have actually a microphone, or if you would like to speak at the podium, whatever you prefer.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Nisambula Vinaka, and greetings from the Fiji Islands. It has been very interesting to hear all your views, and I feel very satisfied and content that the views expressed by all of the speakers here is in convergence and reassuring the views and the consultation that we have had so far in formulating our priorities for this upcoming COP. I've heard you very carefully, and I must say that I would like to have copies of all your speeches so that I can pass it on to my team, the hardworking team, in their consideration and deliberations as they are entering into the negotiation phase and guiding the negotiation process. Responding to your discussions here, I would like to share our own measure of success and to add to what we have already said. As we all know, Fiji being a small island state, and as we have already heard that we are experiencing the effect of climate change now in our daily lives, we would like to, first of all, bring a sense of agency to this COP in all aspects. We hope to use this agency to raise ambition at this COP and beyond. Our yardstick for success would include the following, and some of them you have already mentioned. First of all, under the facilitative TALANOA dialogue, completing the design of the TALANOA dialogue by COP23. So at this COP23, we would like to complete the design of the dialogue. Designing a process that allows the parties as well as non-state actors to share stories and showcase best practices in order to urgently raise ambitions moving forward. The ultimate objective is to raise ambition and enhance NDCs to get us closer to the more ambitious agreement goal in keeping the global temperature within the 1.5 degrees. Now, you have already heard as to what the current NDCs can contribute. It all adds up to more than 3 degrees. The Paris Agreement focus is agreed to as 2 degrees. And we are endeavoring that we want to bring it further to 1.5 degrees. So you can basically see for yourselves that the current level of NDCs is nowhere near to even implement the Paris Agreement of 2 degrees. And that is why it's so fundamental that we look at ways and means to increase our ambition. The next deliverables for the COP23 from our presidency point of view is the progress on the Paris Agreement implementation guidelines. Adopting a text or a draft text would clearly show the way forward in 2018 to ensure that a full package of decisions is finalized by COP24. This package is absolutely critical for making the Paris Agreement fully operational and will need to reflect on a carefully balanced between all key building blocks of the agreement, that is mitigation, adaptation, finance, and other means of implementation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, if we are serious about making progress, and for the implementation of Paris Agreement, it is fundamental that we deliver on these two negotiating streams: the implementation guidelines of the Paris Agreement and the facilitative TALANOA dialogue. If we do not deliver this in 2018 in COP24, it could be seen as a demonstration that we are not serious on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We then have, coming from Pacific Island countries, we would like to empower those who are traditionally marginalized. And here we are looking at adopting the first Gender Action Plan. And we also like to make the local communities and indigenous peoples platform operational in order to give a voice for indigenous people and allowing them to share highly valuable traditional knowledge. At this COP, we would like to also take care of the most vulnerable, and in doing so, making sure that support gets to those who need this as soon as possible. We'd like to see clear progress on the replacement of the adaptation fund and the establishment as it established under the Paris Agreement. Establishing the clearinghouse for risk transfer under the also international mechanism on loss and damage. And also creating a platform within the global climate action agenda for progressive innovative ideas, including decisions around insurance and reinsurance mechanisms. With that in mind, I note with great interest of the various suggestions that we made in your own presentations today. In particular, I would like to just focus on few that I have not covered, but would certainly be a strong signal to the climate change agenda moving forward. The education on climate change is so fundamental for our young generation, because they are the ones who are really going to be affected by the climate change, and also would be the people required to make action or take action in the future. The public participation that has been mentioned herein, we so much support this. We are taking this very seriously in our own nation, and we have been, over the consultations over the year that we have, we feel it's very important that the stakeholders, the non-party stakeholders, be very much engaged in the process of participation. And on this regard, from the UNFCCC process, from the presidency point of view, I am congratulate Morocco for holding the first ever dialogue between a workshop between the parties and between the non-parties immediately after the COP. And we would like to carry that tradition. We have held many consultations throughout the year, and this is another element of our presidency, which is the enhanced engagement of non-parties. We have had various engagements. We had of course, started off with Morocco in February. We then followed up with the workshop in Fiji. We had the sessions here in May, and there was another session in New York, and then finally we are coming down here at COP. And at COP here, this is for the first time that there will be an open dialogue between the parties and the non-parties, to give them the space to see how we can engage better to raise our NDCs and also to deliver on the actions that are required for the climate action. So these are the elements and direction that we would like to take at this COP. I know a lot of these really also goes in sync with what we have already had, and really gives us a very good feeling and reassurance that we are on the same page here. With all that, I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that we are all at the same canoe, and would like to welcome and seek your support in all bringing us the Paris Agreement alive. We look forward to your continued support over the next 2 weeks and beyond. Thank you very much. Vinakavakalevu.
Vinakavakalevu, Ambassador Saran. I would now like to invite Ambassador Aziz Mekwa. He is Ambassador for Multilateral Negotiations and from Morocco. And first, before you take the floor, I also like to take the opportunity to thank you for the really excellent COP that you held last year, and all that you've done also for civil society engagement and enhancement. So,
thank you. Thank you very much, Lena. Thank you all. And thank you for inviting me to be with you today. As Ambassador Saran, our line of conduct through preparing COP22 and after was to have a strong interaction with the non-state actors, and all the chief negotiator I used to meet with all the non-state actors, gather their ideas on every topic of the negotiations, and then go back to the parties and submit to the parties what I had heard from you, and we moved like that. And this is how many things, of course, the parties did not accept everything you suggested, but a lot was used to achieve what we achieved at COP22. I heard a lecture by Noam Chomsky a few months ago, and he was basically saying, and he was not the only one saying, that humanity runs to the major dangers and major dangers of extinction: nuclear war and climate change. Nuclear war, something can be done about it. Of course, it's a miracle that we are still here, but nonetheless, people can do, we can do something about it. Climate change, if we don't act immediately, it will be over. There will be a point of non-return. And we heard that, we've seen some reports saying that by 2030, if we continue, if we just implement the NDCs, we will not reach 1/3 of what we have to do, and we will never reach the 2 degrees by the end of the century. And by 2030, if we continue what we're doing, the capital carbon that we have available will be used by, it will remain only 1/3, reach the 2 degrees, and we will have used everything to reach the 1.5 degree. So, and if you look at the gas emissions, if you look at what's going on, well, we can be pretty pessimistic. But if we see what happened in Paris, and I must say that it was amazing, because after 21 years we finally reached an agreement, and it took quite a long time. And I think that we reached an agreement because people are more and more convinced that something has to be done. Then the fact that we reached an agreement in Paris, the fact that we had that the agreement was entered into force less than 1 year after it was signed, shows that there is that people are conscious that something has to be done, and that's key. But also, what makes me more optimistic is to see what's happening on the ground, what companies are doing, what states, what cities, what non-state actors are doing, what decisions have been taken by many countries. Well, that gives me some sense of optimism. China decided that by 25% of the cars will be electric. Norway by 2020, some companies like Volvo or Jaguar decided that by 2020 they will produce only electric cars. And China said that by 2040 everything will be electric, all the transportation will be electrical. Well, it shows that things are moving and things are happening on the ground. Ambassador Saran said that we have to deliver on the what is called the rule book, so the modalities, procedures, and guidances to implement the Paris Agreement. And absolutely, we have to deliver in that. The Paris Agreement was supposed to enter into force by 2020, and the rule book be finished by 2020. Well, we decided, and everybody decided that by 2018. All the work should be finished. On the TALANOA dialogue, that's also very important. The key of it is where we are, where we want to be, and how we get there. So this is what we will be doing, and it's a process that will be going on during 2018, and I'm sure that we will deliver that under the guidance and the presidency of Fiji, because we've been working for a year now together, and the commitment of the Fijian government is just amazing. So I think I'm an optimistic man, and I think that we're going to deliver, at least for these two things. But the most important thing is the action on the ground. Negotiations are important. We have to go forward with negotiations because we have to finish the procedures, guidances, and modalities to implement the Paris Agreement. That's key. But what is important is action on the ground. People have to see what's going on, what's in it for them. If we tell people that we made progress on the SEPs and the SBI, well, it doesn't mean a lot. But if they see that things are happening, of course, on the mitigation, but also on the adaptation, because a lot is happening, and we have to address all the problems created by climate change, and the Pacific Islands are really suffering from that. There is a report from the American Navy that says that all the centers of war and insecurity and instability in Africa are coming majorly, in a major way from climate change. If you look at the Lake Chad, Boko Haram is mainly becoming, the cause of Boko Haram is mainly because the Lake Chad is shrinking. What's happening in the Sahel, there is no more drinking water in the Sahel, when 20 years ago they used to have cattle. So there is an emergency. So things are happening. I was in the United States months ago, and I spoke with many friends from California, Washington State, even Texas, and everybody's moving. A lot is happening. So, but we have to go quicker, much quicker. And to go much quicker, I think that the education topic is key. We have to change our behavior. We have to change our behavior as companies, as governments, but also as people. We shouldn't use, if somebody gives us a plastic bag, we should refuse it. We should use electric cars. So this is coming from education. And we have seen a lot of changes in the behavior of people along the years, because there was education in schools, education through television, through internet. Education is key. Now, I would like just to add one thing. It's about finance. When I joined the process, that was in February 2016, our first meeting was in Tokyo with the chief negotiator coordinators of the groups. And I understood, I knew about the climate, what I had read in the papers, and about COP21, and that's it. But I understood very quickly that it's all about finance. We have the NDCs. Countries decided and proposed and put forward their NDCs. But most of the NDCs are conditional because countries cannot fund their NDCs. So finance is key. And finance, of course, cannot be public finance. You know, the 100 billion is important. I think that, and I'm sure that the developed countries will implement and bring the 100 billion, but I think that it will never be enough. We need to leverage the private finance. And how to leverage the private finance, this is what the Moroccan presidency has been working on for the last few months, taking initiatives and to understand exactly what is the thing about leveraging private finance. It's key. When you talk finance, it's also how do you attract private finance to invest in climate projects? Well, private finance is about making money. It's not about philanthropy. And it's about making money. That means that the investments have to be attractive. And it's becoming attractive. I have a friend who set a fund for renewable energy in Africa, and the return on investment is between 12 and 16%. Now, trillions of dollars are invested with a negative interest. So there is a lot of money, and this is Cristiana Figueres used to say that there are trillions there looking for investments, and probably with technology, with what's happening today in terms of progress in technology, will make investing in climate projects more attractive for private finance. I'm optimistic also because, you know, this ministerial, this clean energy ministerial, it's 22 countries that gathered and decided to, in Paris, and decided to invest 20 billion in research on technology to address the problems of climate change. Well, actually, last year they decided to raise it to 30 billion, and that's on fundamental research. At the same time, a group of business people from Bill Gates, Soros, Walid bin Talal has had some problems, was having some problems, and many others decided to, as soon as the research is ready, to move, let's say, to transform that fundamental research into technology and into real technology on the ground. So this is what I wanted to say. It's important. I think that we have to stay mobilized, and I thank you, members of CAN. You are the ones who are pushing us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and really also thank you for, I felt both your interventions really helped to amplify the scope of what we could cover here at the table, and I really think that we are getting much closer to having the full picture of Markets for Success for this COP, but also Markets for Success overall and where we need to be. And it felt a little bit like going back in time as well, like, and now I would actually like to have Ambassador Brigitte Collet. She is Ambassador for Climate Change Negotiations, Renewable Energy and Climate Risk Prevention from France. And yeah, she is really like the cherry on the cake of all these three past presidencies. And really thank you very much for coming and for sharing your views as well.
Thank you for having me today. It's really a pleasure. And I would like to emphasize again what my two predecessors said. Exchanges and cooperation with the civil society are really essential to us to carry on the mission that we have. It is a common endeavor we have. It's, you know, in this fight against climate change, each and every one of us, be it in official or even personal capacity as a citizen, we have to cooperate. So thank you very much. I would like also at the outset to pay tribute to the outgoing presidency of the COP, Morocco, which achieved a fantastic work during this year of presidency, and we had the pleasure to very closely cooperate together before they took over the presidency. We heard this morning the new president of the COP, who delivered a very, I don't know how to put it, maybe a bit somber statement, but also very forceful. Very forceful. The situation is a very serious situation, and it's very important to hear it coming from a representative of a Pacific island. At the same time, there is this determination to make progress. And when I say forceful, I don't forget that in France we have hundreds of Fijian rugby players in our teams. And they are fantastic. But this high level of ambition and determination, it's really essential for us to carry on our work. So we have very high expectations for this COP23. I won't repeat what my predecessors have said, but we really need to make progress on the work on the Paris work program. We need to make progress on all issues and in a structured manner. We are already quite encouraged by the preparatory work and the atmosphere in the roundtables which took place, which I hear was very constructive and moved immediately to technical discussion. So it's exactly what we need, and we hope that it will continue this way so that we reach the end of this COP with substantial progress. The TALANOA dialogue, I think we are very close to the final design, and here I would like again to thank the two presidencies for the outstanding work they have done in consultation. Now we have something quite detailed in terms of design, quite ambitious. It should start very early, immediately after COP23, so that we can make the best use of the time we have before COP24 in Katowice to feed in the process, to see that national, regional consultation and events take place to really make sure that we arrive in Katowice with a very good and detailed picture of the situation and also of the solutions, because we need to exchange on solutions, and we need to create a sense of ambition. And you can rest assured that France will work for this on a national basis with a national action plan, but also within the framework of the European Union. And we do believe that because the next COP is in one member state of the European Union, that we have a specific responsibility. This COP is also very important because it's also an opportunity to accelerate action through all the initiatives which are taking place, and we will see many events on this zone, and I would like to invite you on the French pavilion. There is a Paris Agreement Cafe. You're more than welcome to this cafe. Finally, I'd like to touch maybe in more detail on the finance question, because I do agree with Lucille that it is a very, very important point. The $100 billion commitment is there. We're serious about it, but it can be reaffirmed. It's important to look both at mitigation but also adaptation, clearly. You may have heard that France decided to organize a summit in December in order to try to mobilize additional finance. And we are very glad to do this with the support of the Prime Minister of Fiji, with the support of the United Nations Secretary General, the President of the World Bank. The idea of the summit is to talk about all aspects of financing climate action, be it public financing, because it's extremely important, private finance, exactly what Ambassador Meswar just mentioned, How do we mobilize private finance, and also how do we make sure that investment take place in climate-friendly sectors and disengage from non-climate-friendly sectors. We will be looking at the action of local authorities and also at public policies such as carbon pricing or carbon neutrality strategies. And the idea is to talk about all aspects, and mitigation, of course, but adaptation is also very high on the agenda. So I wanted to mention that, and maybe to close on adaptation, the adaptation fund. We recognize it's an important question, and that a number of options and legal questions still need to be clarified. So it will be at the center of some discussions during this COP23. In closing, you can rest on us to support the Fijian presidency to lead us in this canoe in the right direction, and we will be supporting your very high ambition and determination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much again for all the presentations and interventions. I will not make an attempt to summarize what have been said. I would rather hear if there are any questions from people in the room to either our panelists, question of clarification, additional question, or to the three ambassadors that we have unfortunately sitting in front, because there was not enough space to have so many people at the podium. Are there any questions? Yeah, here, can we have microphones? And please state your name and organization.
Kia ora. My name is Ronya, and I've travelled from New Zealand, originally from Germany. I have two questions. One question is the dialogue that you've mentioned that's happening at COP between non-state actors and parties, and I think it was mentioned this morning in the plenary as well that it's happening on Wednesday. Is there more details anywhere people know about it? That was one question.
Yes. No, that's great.
The other question I wanted to address to Adrienne Martinez about your participation building to empathy. And unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough to take a photo of that slide, so I'd be really keen to hear a bit more about, maybe there's some research about, I guess, building more empathy. Empathy is a really big thing, especially around education, and so I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Maybe ambassadors, since you have the mic.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for raising the question. I should have expanded on that more in my address, but now that you've given me an opportunity, thank you very much. Now, this open dialogue is as a result of the SBI decision in SB 46 in May, whereby the parties have decided that in light of the need for the increase or enhanced engagement of the non-parties, that in addition to the work that's already been done in the spaces just like Morocco, and we did in Fiji, and we did in New York, and also the consultations we had in May here in the May sessions, there needs to be, at the COP itself, there needs to be given some space to come together. And it is in this context, the SBI agreed that there will need to be an open dialogue between the parties and non-parties, basically the NGO constituencies and other non-parties that they would like to join in. Having decided on that objective, the purpose, the parties also realized that whilst giving the space for the parties and non-parties to come together, there will need to be clarity as to what would be the outcome of this dialogue and how it should be used. So the parties spelled out that any outcome from this dialogue would be only of persuasive value to the parties. So that is quite clear. So what we did was that we consulted the NGOs over the last couple of months to identify the topics and the modality as to how to conduct the dialogue. And in our consultations, we have identified 2 topics. And this is all identified by the NGOs and non-parties. The first one is enhancing of NDCs. And the second is the enhanced engagement of parties and non-parties topic itself, proposed within the UNFCCC. So it's a 3-hour session, and it will be 2 topics. It will be broken down to 1.5 hours session each, moderated by experienced moderators, and creating a dialogue between the 2 groups. So that's what the plan is, and it will be held on Wednesday the 8th, between 10 to 11 at the Reki room, at the Bond zone, the Bullet zone. So all of you, everybody is welcome to participate. It's a big room, so feel free to all come in full force and engage in the dialogue. When I made this presentation about the dialogue in our previous consultations in Brussels, where I'm based, and also in other meetings, one of the fundamental questions that arose from the floor is, this is all fine, the SBI made a decision or given the mandate for the presidencies to hold this dialogue, but will the parties attend this dialogue? And I think it was a very fundamental point, because if it's only a persuasive value and the whole negotiations is driven by a party-driven process, why should the parties attend? Then my response to the question was that, hey, this is a party decision. The success of this is dependent upon the attendance of parties first and foremost. The second important element of the success is that there must be a rich engagement of the parties and really provide some value to this dialogue. And finally, the third measure of success of this dialogue would be that whether the subsequent presidencies would like to continue with this dialogue. So they are the 3 really aspects of a successful open dialogue. So I'll leave it at that.
And thank you very much for the invitation and really for having this dialogue with us. We are looking forward to that on a Wednesday. And no, sorry. You asked another question to Adrian, so I would like to give him the opportunity to answer your question. And then we had another hand, and we have 2 minutes left. So that was the plan.
All right. And when I talk about empathy, one must understand climate governance as a long-term process, a process that has to go through governmental changes and changes on the people that represent different stakeholders. So when you try to build empathy, the relevance is to sustain that process, to recognize the other stakeholders of their interests and their relationship with each other, and how they should not see each other as adversary, but value their role within the governance process. And I think that is very important, because many of the climate actions that we're putting in place at a national level might have to endure time, and endure time without funding, and endure time by having the stakeholders themselves own the process, own the climate actions, and develop them themselves. So by recognizing themselves not as adversaries, but with a collective goal, and seeing empathy on that, you foment a better governance process than just not recognizing each other as a relevant stakeholder within a process that is done, that has to be done together.
Thanks, which is also repeating, and I think very nicely reflected in this image that also comes from Fiji, that we are all sitting in one canoe, and that unfortunately, leads to the end of this event because we are running out of time. It was a really rich dialogue, and as I said, we were able to highlight some markers of success for COP23, and I just want to leave by saying that you have our back, and we will support the work of Fiji, and we want to make this COP very successful for all of us. And thank you very much again, everybody, for attending this meeting and for really a little small Talanoa here. Thank you very much.